library, particularly Lynn Place, the director who helps us out. Well, and the whole board, of course. And thank you all for coming very much. This is pretty exciting to be talking to you in person. Say behind here. I think that I've been giving presentations here for 12 years. And twice in 19. So it covers 2020. We were almost into 2020 when the students from the Bard Archaeology Field School were arrayed at a table here, reading documents in a dramatic reading from texts of the early 1700s. And so the Bard students who come, thanks to the Hoover Foundation Fellowship that they get, provide something back to the community. And this exhibit that we set up here is part of, it's a section of a display that will be at the Parsonage, so that you would be able to see the results of the excavation in terms of interesting artifacts, and displayed on a map that you'll see later in the slideshow that I'm going to give. And then eventually it will move downstairs so that you'll be looking out over where the excavations were that I'm going to talk about for the first part of the presentation today. And then I will shift to another set of maps that you've got a glimpse of there, that is in process of being made accessible online. It isn't quite there yet. Student Rose Batista is working on making it accessible with me, and Cheyenne Cutter, a former Bard student, worked on that, as well as Ethan Dickerman there behind them. So this is quite a group effort to get this technology, which is quite sophisticated and problematic oftentimes. Even experts say that. But we're working on it. And the hope is that in the meantime, we'll be able, with the library's cooperation, which I hope will work, to perhaps mount it upstairs and also to have it available at the Parsonage, the history department. So that would be a goal here, at least while we're still working on it, but we're almost there, I feel. So that said, we have this two-part presentation. One is an update on the excavations, and I'm going to take you all the way back to 2009, when those excavations started, and take you quickly through what we found and talk to you about why we've been putting all this work into excavating there. And then I'll transition to to work with this new mapping technology that I've mentioned, which is really about Germantown as a whole. It's not focused on the Parsonage, but rather it tries to take us back 220 some years to where people were in Germantown, where people were living, and tells us something about how many people were in their family and about what they were doing there. I'll explain more about that as we get to it. As I go along here, if something isn't quite comprehensible, please raise your hand and ask me, and I'll try to explain. There's lots to say here, and you may have some input. I like these kinds of presentations, as they've been in the past, to be quite interactive. So you may want to ask about what's that, or when we get to the map, who's that over there? And could we go farther out Main Street to look at something there? But you'll see what I'm talking about when we get there. So I also would want to start here by something we've been doing at Bard College for a while now, which is a land acknowledgement, basically to honor the the indigenous people who lived here in Germantown, who we are working with quite actively, have been for a couple of decades now, off and on, the Munsee and Mohican people. And the way that I would thank them and honor them here is to point out that right here, on this map of Germantown, which is a topographic map, there's the boundaries of the town. Right here in the corner at the confluence of the Rolfe-Jansen Kill and the Hudson River, there's a site that goes back over 1,000 years and has very elaborate pottery. It's really one of the key sites to figuring out how old the pottery was in the Hudson Valley and what it would look like, being able to date the pottery. So an archaeologist's analysis on both local avocational archaeologists as well as the state archaeologist at the museum in Albany worked on that site. So we have in Germantown, which I guess I assume you're all familiar with, the town of Germantown. I wanted to ask that first. Is anyone new to Germantown? Okay, yes? Okay, good. And welcome. And has everyone some familiarity with the parsonage that I'm going to talk about first? Anyone not have an acquaintance with the parsonage? Good. Okay. So you're new, but you have still no. Okay. All right. Well, this is it's a couple blocks from here, and I'll try to explain so that you'll understand why it's so important when we get to it, which will be very shortly. So it looks like this is kind of a different format. What I see on the screen is different than what you see. So I'm going to see if I can make this work, but I have a feeling that I might want to change the setup here so that I can move closer to the screen. So if you just give me a moment to do that, I will be ready. I kind of not like being behind lecterns very much. So let's see if that will allow me to advance the slide. No, not going to cooperate. Oh, okay, so I'm not going to fuss with that. But on with the show here. I'll use the system we have here. Okay, so there is this one, and there's another one, and two. Okay, so in the previous slide, you noticed that that was a topographic map on which were superimposed black lines. And they came from this map. This is a copy of a map made in 1740 of the division of lands in Germantown by the Surveyor General of New York, Cadwalader Colden, who was briefly governor in late colonial times. And so we use this to figure out who owned what parcels. We have at this point about 3/4 of them figured out. And when I say we, I mean partly the Germantown History Department, of which Alvin Sheffer is a representative today. And his colleague and mine, Richard Coons, has helped a great deal in figuring out how to go from these early deeds that we have to figure out who lived where and who their neighbors were, what the lay of the land was. So we're going from this map, and we would look particularly up in this part here. I think right there would be the Maple Avenue parsonage. We know that from deeds that tell us the numbers that are on these parcels. So I'm zooming in now. I put a P here next to the parsonage. And this is where we are right now, about here. This is Palatine Park Road and 9G. And you're following whoops, you're not following. Oh, okay. All right. So, let's see. So it doesn't work quite the way I thought. And let's see if I can get this to work. No, maybe that's my relation. Need some batteries. I just put fresh ones in today. So okay, so that's the point. Unless then we don't have a
oh, right here, Professor. We should be able to use this right here.
Oh.
There you go.
Oh, thank you, Katrina. All right, thank you again. All right. Wow, this is intense. Okay, so here's Maple Avenue, Sharps Landing Road, and IG is here. Main Street's down here. So this this gives you an idea of how we use that 1740 map and old deeds from 1741 to identify this area as the location of the parsonage. So basically, we've superimposed these maps, and you'll see much more of that in the second part of my presentation. What you see here, notice this is Queensberry, so these long lots here are important because that would seem to be, if these were the roads, then these are probably houses along the road, the church being there for the parsonage that was here. So just cross 9G. And these are probably garden lots leading down to the Hudson. There's one right here, which we'll get to a bit later, that belonged to Peter Sharp, George Sharp at that time. That lot goes down all the way like this. So it makes this long T shape, which we suggest might be the way to Sharp's Landing, the original Sharp's Landing, that leads to a creek bed that would take you down to the Hudson most directly from where the church was, right here. The original church, then it moves to here. Okay, so let's get to the parsonage. This is the parsonage in 1945. And it was taken by the Eckerts, the people who bought the house right around then and lived there till 1990? 1990, somewhere here. Yeah, 89, 90, when it became a town property. And this is thanks to the Eckert's daughter, who a few years ago sent slides that Ernst Edward and Friedel Eckert took of their renovations of the house. So when we do a study of a place like this, we're really interested in what does this house tell us about Germantown, about the people who lived here. What can we learn from it, both through its history, documents, as well as old photographs. So part of our question here is, what did the Eckerts do with the house? How did they change it or change the landscape around it? And you'll see a lot more of that in just a moment. And then what we dig up tells us about the material culture of the people, the things that they had, the things that they ate, and many other things about them. So we started this project back in 2009. Alvin and I really began the project to find out what the relationship was between the minister who lived there, his family, and the community around them. And then we moved to, as we realized that there was census information about these people, we moved to wanting to know about their slaves. Then, as we researched more, we found that the minister's family continued at the site for several more generations. And they were living there with 3 African Americans who then came to buy the house in 1852 and lived there for 6 more decades without any relatives of the minister's family, on their own. And around 1860, thanks to research that Ethan has done for his senior thesis at Bard and in part Cheyenne for hers, we found that there was a neighborhood of African Americans that coalesced in this part of Maple Avenue. So that became a real focus for us, to find out more about these people who are usually left out of history completely. In many of the records that I've been drawing, we have no mention of African Americans. But in the census, we do have numbers of slaves for this period. I'm going to be looking at 1800, but we'll get to that. So the thing about this photograph is that there looks like there's something right here. It could be a door. And that becomes really important in terms of what we're excavating now. We're also looking at the slope of the land here, which, as I show you a couple more photographs of the house, you will see gets less steep than it is. So there's been a buildup, we think, between 1945 and 1947. Here's the house when it's been transformed. The slope is not so steep. And that means that there was landscaping that the Eckerts did when they changed that opening in the house into a window, and it apparently opened up another window. So this is really where the question arose, was because of this card, in which this is a greeting card for the bicentennial in 1976, based on a 1900 photograph. You see the same, pretty much the same tree here and the same angle of the house. But the Eckerts have put in this picture that they commissioned, they put a door there to the left of the window. And we have the recollection of Frances Zaz, who lives about 3 blocks from here, that Mrs. Eckert told her in the 1980s that she had changed the door and made it a window to protect her antique collection. So we thought this must be, the location of the original door, where there was interaction between the people who lived in the house, the minister, his family, possibly their several slaves, and the people, their neighbors, the community as a whole. So there could be a lot of information in the ground about what life was like back then. We also had the Society for the Study of Hudson Valley Vernacular Architecture album. Yeah, okay. Had them come. We had them come and they said, their best guess for most of them was that the door was over here because it was farther from the fireplace. See the chimney on this wall. Although I think one person said, no, it could be here, based on a similar structure on 9G called the Stone Jug. It's just across the Claremont line. Very much the same design, possibly even built by the same people who lived at the Stone Jug, the Lasher family. So we decided we would investigate that area, which just before we started digging looked like this. So we wanted to focus on this doorway. We also, well, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I want to explain why we decided this couldn't be a doorway. It must have been something else in that earlier photograph. But here we are starting. In the fall of '09, Trevor Johnson, who was a bar student, went on to study historical archaeology at the University of Massachusetts at Boston and got another degree in urban planning, focusing on historic preservation from Harvard, now works extensively across the country. And neighbor, Andrew, age 10, excavating right out from where we think that the edge of the doorway would have been below this window. So they're digging a trench on either side there to see if they can find any difference. Here are some of our volunteers, Alvin, in particular, Susan Robb, who became a town historian, Joe Phelan and Jerry Smith. Jerry, being on the town board at the time, helped us with the liaison to the town, as did Don Westmore here in the front row. Was really our great connection to the town government. And Joe helped us find our first grant that paid for the report that I wrote, the exhibit, another exhibit that's at the Parsonage, the website that you can find at Bard Archaeology. And so thanks to First Niagara, the Hudson River Bank and Trust Company, we were able to get started. And then the Hoover Foundation picked up the support of students and exhibits after that, for which we're very grateful. So here's Susan expanding the trench that we had open there, so we can see what was going on inside. And eventually we end that season and close up looking for evidence of a doorway, trying to find out if this was a sill, a doorstep, thinking that this might be a retaining wall to hold the slope wash away from the site. And this might be the beginning of a patio of some kind, a terrace in front of the doorway. So I'll now take you through more excavations in the front yard to show you what we think was going on with stone. The next slide is a map, one of several different kinds of maps that I'm going to show you that Trevor Johnson did for the report. We were just looking down this trench. So here it is in cross section, a foot of topsoil containing all manner of historic artifacts, quite a mix. Below which was, in this area, the builder's trench, the original builder's trench, where we were looking to see if we could date the house by artifacts that we get in there. And then a later trench to stucco the house, to put cement on it that would hold the house up, which apparently the Eckerts did. So you're seeing it cross section in two different ways, looking at the house, looking away. And just to give you an idea of how we sort things out by layer and by deposit in the case of these filled in trenches. And we go from there to the first Bard College class that took place there. A bunch of Bard students opening a trench across the front of the house to try to find more artifacts that would definitely date it. Is it, our question was 1767, as the numbers on the wall say, or could it be earlier? Could be later. We know that there was a minister, permanent minister in 1746 associated with the Reformed Church. Here's Alvin again, and next to a Germantown student who became a Bard student, taking this class, and there's Susan Robb and June Nelson, who were teachers at Germantown Central at the time. And as Susan was, but I think June was teaching 6th grade at the time. And here is her class visiting, working with that Germantown student, now a Bard student. June's over here, and they're giving us their theory about the doorway and whether the window could have been the door, helping us out in the excavations. This is the end of that season, where we had excavated some large stone slabs, which you'll see more of. And we dug the trench across here, encountering bedrock over in this area, right below the ground surface. So the idea that this window here as a doorway would mean people would then step 2 feet into the house to get to the floor of the room inside. So that seemed to contradict the notion that that's what that was. And it gave us more support for this being the way that this retaining wall lined up and this, what looked like a porch or a patio or a stoop lined up, got us thinking that we might have found evidence that it was the doorway. We're going to come back to this, but for now, I'd like you to remember that you're seeing a kind of cross where we're trenching down this way and then across this way. So we can look at the layering. But what we're going to do this season, this is 2010, is we're going to excavate these areas around it. So we have the whole area open. You can see where things are now. Okay. So that summer, we expanded every 10 feet, digging a roughly 2 foot square and down into the lower yard to get a better idea of what this whole deposit was in the front of the parsonage. Here's Maple Avenue over here and a stone wall. So the next shot is an expanded version of this, where a Germantown high school student found some more large stone slabs, and it turned into the well that at the time nobody knew was there. She had hit this part right here, and as we dug around it, we found an array of stones, and then it went down 10 feet to the bottom of the well. So that's been reconstructed now, and we've done some other interpretation of it, which I may have a chance to share with you. So here is the panel in front of the parsonage. This part deals with the well. That's the full excavation. Blue for water, gray for stones, and photographs of its excavation and reconstruction. This was from a presentation I gave up in Lake George a couple of years ago, where my focus was on this area right here, around a buried foundation that we also found. So if you can see well enough, looks like you can, these stones, for example, this stone here is that stone there. So the drawings, the map that is in front of you when you stand here, it says you are here. You look out over this, and there are stones on the surface that we put there to mark where the buried stones are. And this is part of what Ethan's working on for his master's thesis at Cornell, is to analyze this area more extensively. There's a lot of porcelain in this area. And the next slide that I'll show you is a porcelain tea bowl from China from around the year 1750 that we found almost in the entire vessel, which is very, very rare, right in this area here. So we were excavating, and this came up. Alvin again excavated with Nick Sherman, another Germantown Central School student. Basically a landscape of a house and a dock, and another house, mountains in the background. This would be water back here. So this is a pretty rare vessel. It's similar to later willow pattern imports from China, but it really predates that. It was made, the expert that I showed it to, Paul Huey at Bureau of Historic Sites in Albany, said this was made for the Chinese by them. This wasn't to trade to the West. And it's really quite rare. So all of it was there. It was broken in 27 pieces that we've excavated, and it's now in the Bard Library and an exhibit that may come back to Germantown in the not too distant future. So that was at that corner, that northeast corner of the foundation, which we think may have some significance. It was deeply buried, so probably in the 18th century. The next slide shows you quartz crystals. This is an inch from the scale. So these are large crystals, one of which was buried into the deep deposit at the opening of the foundation that I showed you in that map. So when you go to the exhibit at the parsonage, you actually can place yourself in the map and be able to see the relationships of the stones and the well that are to scale, and have some idea of where these objects were found. This is the one that was found very deeply buried, that we think, again, may have greater significance than just a local piece of quartz that someone left behind. That one of these was near the well, and one of these was inside the foundation. Who put them there? Could be that it was indigenous people who used crystals. We know that to dedicate things or offerings are associated with healing. And we know that the year that the parsonage was established, and we think that this lower structure is the original parsonage from 1746. The pottery next to the foundation suggests it's 1760s, the foundation of the house that's there now. It could be that they're African American who also used crystals, or maybe even German Americans, because crystals are used in turn up in German folklore associated with healing as well. So it's a bit of a mystery. Part of the answer to the mystery may be inside the parsonage. And what we've excavated here in the cellar hearth of the parsonage, under the stones here and here, are more crystals. And they're clustered with shells and bones and pins and buttons and beads, and there's 2 blue glass beads in the center here. And the clustering suggests that someone has lifted the stones and put these objects under them, and taken out some soil and some rocks. So this is a practice that we know from slave quarters in Annapolis from the same period, the late 1700s into the 1800s, that are for protection. spiritual projection, and possibly healing as well. So this is a space that we think is really quite important, and we're working on figuring out how to exhibit what we found there. And that's what the display over here is a start on, being able to show the objects in 3 dimensions where they were positioned in relation to each other. So we'll have a look at that later. But the next slide is to show you what else we found there. It's of such great importance. And I'm hoping you can see, it's still a little light in here. Right over here in the fireplace, this is a close-up of it, are these holes that have been pushed in with a sharp object. And from the 3 of them that are shown up here in close-up, this one, you can almost see it perhaps, is what looks like an outline of a smoking pipe with the way it was done, and the marks on as decoration appear to be West African, based on comparison to similar pipes in the Chesapeake. The center design here looks like a sailboat, has a sort of semicircular hull and then a triangle there. And then this at the very bottom is what we refer to as a cosmogram. It's a map of the universe in West African religion. The universe and the human soul, both. So it works in counterclockwise because it's from south of the equator. The sun goes this way from dawn to the zenith at noon, and sunset here, and then midnight here. And this represents to people from the Congo area, Angola and Congo, birth, maturity, death, and rebirth as an ancestral spirit. A spirit who could then go vertically from the spirit world, which is under a watery boundary like a river or the ocean, to contact the world of the living in the invocation to invite that spirit in. And so it's thought now, in terms of my interpretation, my students and colleagues elsewhere, that this makes this area an altar where rituals took place for healing. The objects under the stones would be offerings to activate this figure of the cosmogram. So this becomes a place in America that is unique at this point, where you have the drawing and the deposits in association with each other. There are circles with crosses in other sites, in Chesapeake, down as far as Texas, and close to us is Brooklyn, but not in association, not next to places where offerings have been made of blue glass beads, crystals, and bones and shells, and iron bars and buttons. So this becomes a place of really great importance that we're hoping that we'll be able to share with more people. And so that's part of the motivation for the current excavations, which I'll get to in just a moment. That is right inside there. This is a map of the whole site before the dig this summer. And I wanted to mention that here's the well and the buried foundation there. We've been working the last few years back here. Cheyenne working on this area for her senior thesis, and another student who has gone to grad school in Boston on hers, to show a concentration of German American artifacts there. Stoneware or Steingut that was very, very common in the 1700s, are really heavily concentrated there. And then looking to see whether there might be more offerings back here at the edge of the yard, due north of the east wall of the house. So having a symbolic directionality. In this case, 2 finger rings and some pins, and the front teeth of a woman's dentures from 100-some years ago. Something very personal that might represent that person. If in this sort of area where it's transitional from the domestic space to beyond, to the fields to the north. So we've now turned to the excavations of this season. And we're working in front of the house again. These are the 6 students plus Ethan, who was my assistant this summer, excavating under the canopy because it gets quite hot in August there with the sun on the south of us, bouncing off the walls and radiating off the stone of the house. So the students were in groups of 2, with Ethan assisting me. We're excavating between the arms of the cross that you saw. And that's what it would look like if you were to view it from the window, looking down from the parsonage. This is where we hope to have the exhibit once it's complete. And so we're starting these small squares. And in the afternoons, we're taking refuge in the potting shed or garage next to it. The students are sorting out their discoveries, making sure that they match their field notes and all the identifications. And then finally, about the 3rd week, we had to move here to this room where there was air conditioning. So thanks to the Germantown Library, we were able to continue our work right where you're sitting and sorting out, checking against the map of the site, where things were found and what they might suggest. So a teapot from the late 1700s and a figurative piece of ceramic looking like we thought a llama, strangely enough. So the art ceramic and pottery from the early 1800s there, for example. So what happened next was that we started taking the walls of the excavations down. So the original trench was here, coming across this way. And now the students are opening, oh, excuse me, I got it backwards. Here's the house. Going this way with arms this way. And the next thing happens is finally we unearth the previous excavations and join it to the ones today. And that's how it looks right now. So if it's not pouring down rain, thunder, and lightning, we can visit when we're done today to have a look at what we've got. It looks very much like you have these stones lining up with the window, bedrock over here. These are large slabs that are fairly level. We have a bit of a mystery with these 2 very large slabs. And we're talking like this and that thick, that we don't quite know how they fit, what the reason for them being there was. They may have moved slightly downhill, as you can see, but they have joined this area that looks like a pavement leading into the house. So we're at this point hoping to keep this open for the season, for the winter, and do more excavation right along in here next season, next spring, if we have a class of BART students who can come possibly next summer for the summer fields. So that's the midpoint in what I was hoping to show you. Not sure how I'm doing with time here. Ooh, a bit late. So I'm going to go fairly quickly and give you a taste of the mapping project. This is the final map, really, for this part of the show. This is what Ethan and I are currently working on. We've drawn all these rocks to scale, several measurements for each one of them, showing what almost looks like a pathway going this way around the big stone that may have served as a table or a seat. Not quite sure. This is ones that we put in from earlier maps and photographs, and some bedrock over here. So we want to be testing more in this area to see what's going on in that part of the site. So I'm going back to this map, which is 1798. And Germantown outlined in red. This is the John Wigram map from the New York State Archives, thanks to Richard Coons, who got it for us at the Parsonage. And I'm going to do a show of the way that we are working this into a digital program that allows us to link up information from the census, from historical records, municipal records, and so forth. And so I'm just showing you what it looks like, and it's not distorted. This is the census we're drawing on. And the last page of 4 pages of the census of 106 people living in Germantown in 1800. And the males and females in their family with numbers and their slaves over here. And in the second to last column, other free people of color are listed. So I'm going to be drawing on some of that information as I show you how the map is working. We're working towards this map, which is 1858, from some of Ethan's work, showing the neighborhood that I mentioned in these red circles around the parsonage, which is here. So people who were enslaved in this area were fairly well distributed, as I'll show you some of them, their locations in a moment, in 1800, but by 1860, they're pretty much focused right around here on Maple Avenue. And we're trying to understand the significance of that neighborhood 31 years after emancipation. So what I'm going to do is transition to the other program. I'll take a question if anyone has at this point. And if not, then I will go to here. So this is, again, a superimposition of that map of Germantown on a topographic map. And this is what I hope you will be able to get. You'll be able to log into this in not too distant future. The parsonage is right here. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. We're not connected. What do we do?
You need to close out of the PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you, Cheyenne and Devin. Get out of PowerPoint. Oh. Okay, and that. There we go. Sorry. And you need to activate the little red. Thank you.
Escape out of this. How do you go back to where we just were?
Oh, well, I've already canceled them.
Bring that back up.
Okay. Oh, that's the library's homepage. That one, yeah.
I wanted to get back to what was down here.
Oh.
That's what my laser was.
This is a.
Yeah.
Are you seeing the cursor? There it is. Okay, good. Thank you. So here, here's Reverend Shaver's house again. That is to say, the parsonage. This is Maple Avenue. Today goes down to Main Street here, 9G. And what I've been doing with Rose's help and Allison Meyer's help early on was taking the information from the census and some other documents and creating a way to find out basic information about these people. So we would get this to come up if we clicked on the house icon. So Reverend Shaver is not there in 1800, but that in the previous census, his predecessor, Gerhard Daniel Koch, was there with a family of 4 and 3 slaves. So we then notice that across the street is G. Koch. And if we chose that, we'd find out that's his son, Garrett Koch, who lives there still with 3 slaves, a family of 4. And he was town supervisor in 1802 to 1804, saying that he grew up right here. And then you could be able to move the map and say, take a look at the the Sharp on here and find out that's Peter Sharp, a descendant of George, with his family of 9 and 4 slaves. That he was supervisor when this map was being made, supervisor of the town, became justice of the peace, and that he was listed in 1808 as owning the landing. And the map that I showed you a while ago from 1740 showed the Sharp property in this area along Sharp's Landing Road, which is this. And an extension this way along this stream, which I think has enough fairly level space on either side of it. It would take you down to the Hudson. There's a possibility that the access to the Hudson was over here, but it looks to me much more probable that this would work there. I'm going to show you just a few more properties to give you a feel for how this works, at least in this form of it. We went to Esquire Dellenmater here, so he's a gentleman, and it turns out he's Abraham. He had a family of 6 with 3 slaves. He was justice of the peace, so presumably an attorney. And that after his death, early in the 1800s, his wife, Maria, bought the parsonage from her sister, Christina Timbrook, and Cook, and moved to the parsonage, which is here. So giving a sense of the relationship between the people who lived in these houses, their families, and the people who were in bondage at their homesteads. There are a few more here that are smaller holdings. This one here is notable, I think, because it has the most slaves of any holding in the family. It has 6 people in bondage and 1 other person of color. And that William Shipmost is listed in 1811 as a farmer. So this being Camp Creek Road, or Camp Creek, sorry, itself, not the road, as is figured on that map of 1798. And here is the matching topographic feature of the Camp Creek today. So it's just on the east side of Camp Creek Road where the Shipmost farm was. So each of these has one of these texts that comes up that tells you who's in the family. There are, out of 50 landowners, householders that we have on this map, I can identify 46 of them and tell you who they were, how many in their family, did they own slaves, what were their occupations were in about half the cases, and some other information about them. There are a few houses, such as this one, which has no name to it, but we can surmise it's either a Phillips or Phelps on this map or another Klein in this one. So we can put, I think, at this point, about 60% of the, we can identify to the house of these people. And one of the things that we're really noticing here is that for all of the listing of slaves, there are 23 households that have slaves. We can put, with 1 or 2 exceptions, we can put them on the map, which tells us something about the people who, out of the 106 in the census, the 50 people who made it onto this map, with a few extra who were identified, like the one I just showed you. So it accounts for most of the people in bondage in Germantown, which is another topic that we want very much to learn about. What happens between 1800 or even back as far as 1760s and the 1860s. Yes, Don?
So can you have a gross figure? How many total were there in bondage?
46.
46.
In 1800, yes. Roughly, I think it's 6% of the population of Germantown. Yes?
Do you have any indication of their race?
We presume they're African American. They could be indigenous, but likely for this area, it's African American. You get into southern New England, and they're more indigenous slaves at this time. So I'll just take you down Hover Avenue. to this interesting figure here. It looks like a W that became an A, hover, but we know it as Hover, that family now. And Maple Avenue continues straight, and eventually gets over to the Rockefeller House on Route 8. So we know that road doesn't go that way, that this is a sketchy part of the map. And if we bent this figure here down this way and connected it down that way, we would be close to one of the old Hover families that's right here on Hover Avenue Extension near Camp Creek. So I suspect that's where Andrew Hover lived with a family of 7, who was a justice of peace. And I suspect that his brother, John, was also living close by on the same property. So that's another example of saying the census tells us that here Andrew is number 9 and John is number 10 in 1800. So very likely he's living next door. We can actually follow the census taker around, in some cases 4 or 5 houses. So if we then come down what we know as Maple Avenue, we would get to, let's see, I'm sorry, I went south and I meant to go east. To give you an example of a couple more, we have Heiser here, who is the pound master. So he's taking care of stray dogs. So we know that about him as a municipal office. And he's next to Simon or Simeon Rockefeller, who is there and was a tax collector, a town clerk, commissioner of schools, and town supervisor in the 2nd decade. And he's living there with 6 families in one state. So that's just to give you a taste of the information that we have. And I think because I've presented a bit longer than I meant to, I started a bit late, I would stop there just to give you a sense of this. You could, once we have this available, hopefully upstairs and at the parsonage, you can, or it's available online, you'll be able to explore. And I'm hoping that to work with Germantown Central School. I've been talking with the social studies teacher there about having his students be able to do research with this and look at particular places, particular families. So we're hoping that will start this spring if all goes well. So I'm thinking whether I have any more to tell you about right now. I think I'm pretty much done. If you have questions or suggestions, very happy to hear them. Done?
Sure, just a question on the map. You've got this identified as Germantown going up here on the right middle. DER.
Yeah.
Swing over to the right, you just move it to the left a bit. Yeah. Now you got another, it says over here, Germantown.
Right. This is from the topographic map that we have underlying the historic map. Wait, actually it says Claremont.
Oh, it says Claremont.
Yes. Right.
All right. Thank you.
That's okay. And then you have the role of Jensen. Okay. Yeah. And this is a difficult map to work with. Things are not positioned where you would expect them to be in terms of the roads. For example, this would be the Dales Bridge Road here in 1800. Now maybe it did go right along the edge of the bluff and down to Moore's house here, right along the creek. But more likely it went where it is today and crosses the old Hill there where the red line is. So you see that we've not been able to really, the term is georeference, to connect places in the landscape consistently. This map was created with some distortion because we took Wigram's map and stretched it so it would fit certain places that we knew, intersections of roads or houses in the case of the parsonage. And then it got a better fit, but still it's very hard to get it completely in sync. when we go to the 1858 map that Beers made, we'll be able, I think, to actually say pretty exactly where the, I'm trying to think of how many 256 or so members of the Germantown community in the census, where they were located. So that's our next goal, is to be really exact, to go from this map and even back to the 1740 map, and then be able to say, okay, this is the house. If it's still there, or it's ruins, or maybe we need to do some archaeological testing to find out if that's the spot that we think it is. But we should be able to be quite exact by the 1850s. And then there are a series of maps in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that we could eventually tolerate to corroborate our information. Yeah. You see the icon for the church there. It says Reformed, D for Deutsche Church. And another thing that I think students could work on, for example, is what happens here at the intersection of Main Street and G. What's going on with all these Rockefellers, for example? This becomes the hamlet today. This is Church Avenue, Main Street, Maple Avenue. So the school is there. But over here, we know that the Rockefellers had a mill on this little creek by the 1750s or 60s. 51, good. And that there was a blacksmith shop. Next to the mill was a house that became a store and then a saloon. So the economic center of Germantown at that time. And that may be somewhere close to where Esquire Rockefeller lives here with his family of 5 and 5 sons. So this gives you a sense of what his career was. Frederick Rockefeller, turns out, was the blacksmith for the community and the inspector of schools as well. So there's that neighborhood there. And then as you work your way down to Cheviot, you have a series of houses, a couple of which are Lasher, and the identifications. And in the census, there are 4 Lashers in a row in one place, suggesting that these 2 houses, which don't have names, are also Lashers. This one is much larger, as you can see. It turns out it has a family of 12. So I think that they may even be reflecting the size of the house in some cases.
So when did Chevy acquire the name?
A bit later. It was called Jacoby's Landing. Yeah. So it says Jacoby. Yeah, and then there's another Jacoby here. Although I think in this house we have someone named John Acker, who doesn't appear on the map, but in the census he's listed as a ferryman. So I suspect that after one of the Jacoby families dies, he takes over the ferry work. And the primary residences are here. We have the grist mill. It's along the creek here that was being run by Philip Clubb, who was over here close to East Camp Road. One there. That was listed as running a sawmill in Cheviot. Now, so okay, well, thank you again for. And, yeah, so if you want to take a look at this, these tags hanging on the side probably won't be orange. They're just to attract attention, but they will be where the information is on each of the artifacts. And they're lined up with the artifacts that are positioned here. The idea is that we'll be able to put this so that you'll be able to move layer on layer. So you'll be able to get closer to the artifacts. Our hope is that this won't have glass or plexi on the top. We'll actually be able to touch the artifacts, reach into the exhibit. And you can also make sure that you plug the, you kind of pull on the tag, tug on the tag, the artifact will vibrate, it kind of comes alive. And so there'll be 3 of these. This was one of the squares that you saw first. There'll be another one here, another one here, and they'll be positioned on the map, that the last of the maps that I showed you that Ethan and I worked. So, and possibly with photographs of the stones. So you'll be able to look down to the bottom and see what we excavated after we removed the earth that contained these artifacts. And there may be another position in the middle, some other artifacts that aren't distributed spatially. So the idea is that if it's possible, we haven't worked this out quite yet, we'll be able to, with the emplacements in the cellar heart that we think are so important, the beads and crystals, bones and nails and pins, we'll be able to actually put something that isn't wood, but will be clear down in and suspend the artifacts so that they're in their spatial relationship with others and have it lit. This is not how the lighting's going to work. The lighting should be internal to the box. But this is as far as the students with it. But that would make something that I think would be very unusual. I haven't seen anything like this in any of the museums, other exhibits that I've visited. But I think be a powerful statement about how the largest things that are under there, the things that were placed there in particular positions, which I think partly carries the meaning of what they are, what they will live to do. So this is basically a simulation of that. In the hopes that we'll be able to figure out better and be able to mount that exhibit in the Parsonage cellar.
Maybe some kind of a blue slate box.
Yeah, something like that. We've thought about holograms, you know, but I think the real things would be bigger than what's powerful. Being able to see them in relation to each other and to the whole of the heart with the figures on the right side, which carry lots of symbolism and significance. So come up, have a look if you like. And I'm not sure what it's doing outside. Okay. So we normally not open up the exhibit when it's raining. These are pretty, they're huge stones, but they are kind of positioned and good slide. So maybe what we'll do is schedule, as Katrina suggested, another visit, another coach. Okay. Good. Thank you. We'll let you go. Thank you. Thank you.